The Academy mockery. The crystal spires of Nexus Prime gleamed under the light of three suns as another day began at the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. The Stellar Defense Academy had trained officers from 200 different species for over 5 centuries. Its halls echoed with the footsteps of beings who would one day command fleets and protect civilizations across the stars. In classroom Delta 7, 43 students from 17 different worlds waited for their military history professor. The room buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, translated instantly by neural implants that allowed perfect communication between species. Zara stretched her scaled arms above her head, her amber eyes scanning the room. As a Saurian, from the desert world of Zirion, she was used to heat, but the Academy's climate control always seemed too cold for her liking. Her people had been part of the Galactic Union for 800 years, ever since they had achieved faster-than-light travel and abandoned their old ways of tribal warfare. Next to her sat Keth, whose body was made of pure energy contained within a crystalline framework. The luminary had transcended physical form millennia ago, choosing to exist as beings of light and thought. Keth's form pulsed with soft blue radiance as he communicated through harmonic frequencies that the translators converted to words. "Where is Professor Thane?" Keth asked, his voice carrying the melodic quality of his energy-based speech. "He has never been late in the 3 years I have studied here." Across the room, Voss clicked his mandibles in annoyance. The insectoid being from the hive worlds was used to precise timing. His people operated with mechanical efficiency, every action coordinated through their collective consciousness. Delays and unpredictability made him uncomfortable. "Perhaps he is ill," suggested Mira, a pale humanoid from the ice moons of the Centauri system. Her silver hair caught the light as she turned to look at the door. "Though I have never known a Thalorian to suffer from disease." The door finally opened, and Professor Thane entered slowly. The elderly Thalorian moved with deliberate care, his 6 arms carrying various data tablets and projection devices. His large, multifaceted eyes reflected the light like jewels, but today they seemed dimmer than usual. The tentacles that served as his secondary arms trembled slightly as he set his materials on the desk. "My apologies, students," Professor Thane said, his voice carrying the wisdom of his 400 years. "Today we will discuss a topic that requires careful consideration." The holographic display in the center of the room activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of colored points of light marked the locations of different civilizations. Green indicated full members of the Galactic Union, yellow showed species under consideration for membership, and blue marked allied races who chose to remain independent. For the first time in their academic careers, the students saw a single, red dot. "Professor?" Zara raised her clawed hand. "What does the red marking indicate?" Professor Thane's tentacles curled inward, a sign of distress among his people. "Red indicates a quarantined species, a civilization that has been permanently banned from joining the Galactic Union." Excited whispers filled the room. None of the students had ever heard of such a thing. The Galactic Union prided itself on inclusivity and peaceful cooperation. What species could be so dangerous or undesirable that they would be banned entirely? "The quarantined species," Professor Thane continued, "inhabits a system they call Sol, approximately 57 light-years from our current position. They refer to themselves as humans." The whispers turned to laughter. Everyone had heard stories about humans, passed down through generations like ancient myths. They were supposedly savage creatures who still engaged in physical combat and consumed the flesh of dead animals. Parents used tales of human brutality to frighten misbehaving children. "Humans are real?" asked Voss, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "I thought they were just stories to scare young ones." "Oh, they are quite real," Professor Thane replied grimly. "And they are the only intelligent species in recorded history to be permanently excluded from galactic society." Keth's crystalline form brightened with curiosity. "What did they do to earn such a distinction? Did they attack Union ships?" "I heard," said Mira with a giggle, "that they still fight wars with metal projectiles. Can you imagine? Not even energy. Weapons. The laughter grew louder as more students joined in. They came from highly advanced civilizations where conflicts were resolved through meditation, computer arbitration, or at worst, non-lethal energy competitions. The idea of beings actually harming each other physically seemed absurd. My instructor at the primary academy told us, added Jex, a tall, thin being from the gas giant Typhon, that humans actually touch their enemies when they fight, with their actual bodies. How disgusting, exclaimed Nira, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly when she moved. My people haven't engaged in physical contact during disputes for over 2,000 years. Professor Thane watched his students mock and joke about humans. His expression grew darker with each comment, but the young beings were too entertained to notice their teacher's distress. They probably don't even have proper space travel, said Zara. I bet they use chemical rockets like primitives. Do they even have shields? Asked Keth. Or do they just hope their metal hulls protect them? The mockery continued for several minutes. Students competed to tell the most ridiculous story about human backwardness. They spoke of humans eating with their hands, sleeping on solid surfaces, and making loud noises when communicating. Each tale was more absurd than the last. Professor Thane finally raised all 6 of his arms, calling for silence. The room gradually quieted, though many students continued to grin at their own cleverness. You believe, the professor said slowly, that humans are quarantined because they are too primitive for civilized society? Of course, replied Zara confidently. What else could it be? They fight with metal sticks and exploding chemicals. They're barely more advanced than animals. They probably smell terrible too, added Mira. All that violence and primitive living must make them quite unpleasant. Professor Thane walked to his desk and picked up a sealed container marked with official Union security symbols. The students had never seen such high-level classification markings before. These, he said, lifting the container, are classified military archives from the Great Archive on Galactic Prime. They contain records from an incident that occurred 173 years ago. The students leaned forward with interest. Classified military records were incredibly rare in their peaceful galaxy. Most conflicts were resolved through diplomacy long before they required military intervention. Professor, said Voss, his compound eyes reflecting curiosity, what kind of incident required classification? The kind, Professor Thane replied, that changed the fundamental structure of our galaxy forever. He opened the container carefully, revealing several data crystals that pulsed with soft light. Each crystal was marked with warnings in multiple languages. Restricted access, psychological evaluation required, command authorization only. Before we proceed, the professor said, his voice taking on a serious tone that the students had never heard before, I must warn you, what you are about to learn is not entertaining. It is not amusing. It is the most important lesson you will ever receive in this academy. The laughter died completely. Something in their teacher's manner made even the most confident students feel uncertain. Professor Thane selected one of the crystals and inserted it into the holographic display system. The galaxy map disappeared, replaced by official Union documents bearing the highest classification seals. 173 years ago, he began, our galaxy faced a threat unlike anything in recorded history. We called it the Crimson Nebula War, though it was less a war than a desperate struggle for survival. Images appeared in the hologram, showing vast red clouds of what looked like living tissue spreading across star systems. The sight made several students gasp in horror. The enemy was not a traditional species, Professor Thane continued. They called themselves the Ravager Swarm, though we later learned they were not truly individual beings at all. They were a collective consciousness that consumed entire worlds, converting all organic matter into more of themselves. The images showed planets being literally devoured, their surfaces turning red as the Ravager Swarm spread across them like a disease. Cities, forests, oceans, all were consumed and transformed into more of the horrible collective. The swarm had already destroyed 17 civilizations by the time we detected them, the professor explained. They moved through space in massive bioships, each one the size of a small moon. They could not be reasoned with, negotiated with, or deterred. They existed only to consume and expand. Zara felt her scales prickle with fear. How did the Union stop them? Professor Thane's tentacles curled tighter. We didn't. Not at first. Our combined fleets engaged the swarm at the Battle of Kepler's Edge. We lost 60% of our ships in the first encounter. The hologram showed the devastating battle, Union vessels firing their most advanced weapons at the organic nightmare ships of the Ravager swarm. The bioships absorbed the energy attacks and kept coming, wrapping around Union vessels with tentacle-like appendages and dissolving them with acidic secretions. After Kepler's Edge, Professor Thane said quietly, our military analysts calculated that we had perhaps 18 months before the swarm reached the core systems. Every major world in the galaxy would be consumed. The classroom was silent, except for the soft humming of the ventilation system. The students stared at the images of destruction with growing horror. That, said the professor, was when someone suggested asking the humans for help. The silence broke as several students laughed nervously. Humans? Said Keth, his light flickering with confusion. What could primitive humans do that the entire Galactic Union could not? Professor Thane's large eyes focused on each student in turn. That young one's was exactly what the Union Council asked. He touched another control, and the hologram changed to show a vast assembly hall filled with representatives from hundreds of species. At the center of the hall stood a small figure that looked different from all the others. This recording, the professor explained, shows the emergency session of the Union Council. The human representative had just arrived. The student studied, the human with curiosity. It was smaller than most of the other species present, with pale skin and dark hair arranged in an orderly fashion. It wore a simple uniform with minimal decorations. Compared to the elaborate clothing and exotic forms of the other delegates, the human looked almost pathetically ordinary. The human doesn't look very impressive, observed Mira. No, agreed Professor Thane sadly. She didn't. The recording began to play, and the students heard the human's voice for the first time. It was higher in pitch than they expected, with a musical quality that their translators rendered as clearly feminine. Honorable delegates, the human said, her voice calm and steady despite addressing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Force. We have received your request for assistance against the entity you call the Ravager Swarm. One of the delegates, a massive creature with crystalline armor, leaned forward. Admiral Chen, with all due respect, our combined fleets have failed to stop this threat. What could your small and technologically limited civilization possibly contribute? Admiral Chen looked directly at the speaker, her small eyes showing no fear or offense. Delegate Corvin, you are correct that our technology is limited compared to yours. We have no energy shields, no gravity weapons, no faster-than-light communication. Our ships are primitive by your standards. Then why, asked another delegate, should we waste precious time on your offer? The human admiral was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her words would haunt the students forever. Because, Admiral Chen said simply, we're not offering to fight your way. We're offering to fight our way. The recording paused, and Professor Thane looked at his confused students. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I will show you exactly what Admiral Chen meant. I will show you what the humans did to save our galaxy, and after you see it, you will understand why they are banned from joining us. He began packing the data crystals back into their secure container. Professor? Zara called out urgently. You can't stop there. What happened next? Professor Thane sealed the container and looked at his students with an expression of deep sadness. What happened next, he replied, is why these records have been classified for over a century. What happened next is why the Union Council voted unanimously to quarantine humanity forever. The class bell rang, but none of the students moved. They sat in stunned silence, their minds racing with questions. Are humans really that dangerous? Whispered Mira. Professor Thane was quiet for a long moment. Child, he finally said, humans are not dangerous because they want to harm others. Humans are dangerous because of what they are willing to sacrifice to protect others, and that makes them the most terrifying species in the universe. The terrible truth. The night after Professor Thane's revelation, none of the students slept. Well, Zara paced her dormitory room, her scaled feet clicking against the metal floor as questions swirled through her mind. What could humans have done that was so terrible it required permanent quarantine? What did fighting their way mean? Across the academy grounds, Keth dimmed his crystalline form to almost nothing, trying to process the day's disturbing lesson. His people communicated through shared energy patterns, and the confusion radiating from his classmates created a dissonant harmony that made concentration impossible. When morning came, classroom Delta 7 was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through the academy about Professor Thane's classified archives. Students who normally attended other courses crowded into the room, sitting on the floor and standing against the walls. Even some junior instructors had quietly slipped in to observe. Professor Thane entered carrying the sealed container, his 6 arms moving with careful deliberation. His large compound eyes surveyed the packed room, and his tentacles curled with what might have been resignation. "I see. Word has traveled," he said softly. "Very well. But understand this, what you learned today must never leave this room. The Union Council has kept these records classified for good reason." He placed the container on his desk and opened it with the same careful precision as the day before. The data crystals pulsed with their inner light, each one containing horrors that most galactic citizens had never imagined. "Yesterday," Professor Thane began, "we learned that Admiral Sarah Chen offered to help the Union fight the Ravager swarm their way. Today, you will learn what that meant." He selected a different crystal and inserted it into the holographic display. The image that appeared made several students gasp. It showed a detailed tactical analysis of the Ravager swarm, complete with biological specifications and behavioral patterns. "The humans," Professor Thane explained, "spent 72 hours studying our data about the swarm. They analyzed every battle, every encounter, every failure. Then they presented their battle plan to the Union Council. The hologram changed to show the same assembly hall as before, but now Admiral Chen stood at a tactical display, addressing the gathered delegates. The Ravager swarm, Chen's recorded voice explained, operates on a simple principle: consume and convert. They absorb energy attacks and use the power to fuel their expansion. They adapt to kinetic weapons by hardening their bioarmor. They counter every strategy we use by evolving countermeasures." "Then how do we stop them?" asked Delegate Corvin, his crystalline armor reflecting the tactical display's light. Admiral Chen's expression remained calm, but something in her eyes made several delegates shift uncomfortably. "We don't stop them, Delegate. We end them. Completely. Permanently. With no possibility of recovery or adaptation." "What does that mean?" asked another delegate. The human admiral touched her display, and new tactical information appeared. The gathered aliens studied the data with growing confusion and horror. "Our analysis indicates," Chen continued, "that the swarm's collective consciousness is maintained through quantum entanglement networks. Disrupt the network completely, and the entire swarm dies instantly across all infested systems." "How do we disrupt a quantum network of that magnitude?" asked a delegate from the Veil Nebula worlds. Admiral Chen's next words sent a chill through the assembly hall. "We detonate our entire nuclear arsenal simultaneously across 47 star systems. The quantum cascade effect will sever all swarm connections permanently." The recording paused, and Professor Thane looked at his stunned students. Several were staring at the hologram with open mouths. "Did she say nuclear arsenal?" whispered Voss, his mandibles clicking nervously. "The humans," Professor Thane replied, "had spent the previous century building weapons designed to destroy planets, not conquer them, not occupy them, destroy them completely." He resumed the recording. The alien delegates in the assembly hall were arguing frantically, their voices rising in panic and outrage. "Admiral Chen," Delegate Corvin's voice cut through the chaos. "You're talking about rendering 47 star systems uninhabitable for thousands of years. Some of them, yes, Chen replied calmly. But the alternative is the consumption of every living world in the galaxy. The radiation alone would kill billions of innocent beings. Admiral Chen's expression never changed. Delegate, the Ravager swarm will kill trillions of beings. And unlike radiation, which fades with time, the swarm grows stronger with every world it consumes. A delegate from the peaceful Harmony world stood up, his melodious voice trembling with horror. Surely there must be another way, some solution that doesn't require such barbarism. The human admiral looked directly at him. Delegate Chorus, your people have spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of peaceful resolution. I respect that deeply. But the Ravager swarm cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or convinced to change its nature. It exists only to consume. The only way to stop something that cannot be deterred is to destroy it so completely that it ceases to exist. The recording paused again, and Professor Thane studied his students' faces. They were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The Union Council debated for 6 hours, he explained. Some delegates argued for evacuation instead of fighting. Others suggested trying to contain the swarm rather than destroy it. But the humans had done the mathematical analysis. The hologram showed complex calculations and probability matrices. According to human projections, Professor Thane continued, any strategy other than complete annihilation would result in the eventual consumption of the entire galaxy. They had calculated every possibility, every alternative. There was only one solution that guaranteed survival. Zara raised a trembling hand. Professor, did the Council agree to the human plan? They did, he replied grimly. After 18 hours of debate, they voted to authorize Operation Final Dawn. The hologram changed to show the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Union ships from hundreds of worlds gathered in massive formations, while human vessels, small, dark and bristling with weapons, took positions throughout the affected star systems. The humans, Professor Thane explained, had brought everything. Every nuclear weapon their species had ever built. Every antimatter bomb, every fusion warhead, every planet-killer device in their arsenal. They had built their entire military doctrine around the concept of mutually assured destruction. New images showed the human fleet in detail. Unlike the sleek, elegant vessels of other species, human ships looked like flying weapons platforms. They had no luxury quarters, no scientific facilities, no diplomatic suites. They were built for one purpose: to deliver devastating firepower. The human fleet commander, Professor Thane continued, was Admiral Chen herself. She had volunteered to personally oversee the operation. The hologram showed Admiral Chen on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by her crew. The students were struck by how young many of the humans looked. Some appeared barely older than themselves. Professor? Asked Keth, his crystalline form flickering with concern. Why do so many of the humans look so young? Professor Thane's tentacles curled with deep sadness. Because they were volunteers. Every single human in the fleet had volunteered for a mission they knew was suicide. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Suicide. The concept was so foreign to most galactic species that their translators struggled to convey its meaning. The quantum cascade effect required for destroying the swarm, Professor Thane explained, could only be achieved by simultaneous detonation at the precise moment of optimal quantum alignment. The timing had to be perfect across 47 star systems. Manual control was the only option. Manual control? Whispered Mira. The humans had to be physically present to detonate their weapons. There was no remote detonation, no automated systems, no possibility of escape. Every human in the fleet knew they would die the moment they triggered their weapons. The recording resumed, showing Admiral Chen's final transmission to the Union Council. Council members, her voice came through clearly. Operation Final Dawn is ready to commence. Our ships are in position across all target systems. The Ravager swarm has taken the bait and concentrated their forces for what they believe will be their final assault on the core worlds. Admiral, came Delegate Corvin's voice. Our sensors show swarm forces massing around your position. You're heavily outnumbered. That's the idea, Delegate. We need them all in one place when we trigger the cascade. Admiral Chen, another voice interjected. It's not too late to reconsider. Perhaps we could try evacuation protocols instead. There was a long pause before Admiral Chen responded. When she spoke, her words would echo through galactic history. Delegates, my species has a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Today we do something. The recording switched to external views of the human fleet. The students watched in horror as massive swarm bioships descended on the human vessels like living nightmares. The humans didn't try to flee or fight conventionally. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the largest concentrations of swarm forces. What are they doing? Cried Nira, her crystalline body chiming with distress. They're making sure, Professor Thane replied quietly, that when they die, they take as many swarm entities with them as possible. The first detonation was visible, across 3 star systems. A human destroyer, completely surrounded by swarm bioships, triggered its nuclear payload at point-blank range. The explosion vaporized everything within 1,000 kilometers and created a quantum shockwave that rippled across space. Then the cascade began. One by one, human ships throughout the 47 star systems detonated their weapons in perfect synchronization. Each explosion created another quantum disruption, and the disruptions began to resonate with each other, building in power and complexity. The students watched in stunned silence as entire star systems lit up with the fire of human sacrifice. Every explosion represented dozens or hundreds of human lives, willingly given to save species they had never met. The quantum cascade reached critical resonance after 43 minutes. When it did, something unprecedented happened throughout the galaxy. Every swarm bioship, every infested world, every trace of the Ravager collective consciousness simply stopped. The quantum network that bound them together shattered, and they died instantly across thousands of light years. The threat that had consumed 17 civilizations and threatened to devour the entire galaxy was eliminated in less than an hour. The recording ended with a long shot of empty space where the human fleet had been. Nothing remained but expanding clouds of radioactive debris and the quantum echoes of the cascade effect. Professor Thane removed the crystal from the display and looked at his traumatized students. Many were crying. Others sat in stunned silence, struggling to process what they had witnessed. 17,000 humans died that day, he said quietly. Admiral Chen and every member of her fleet. They saved approximately 4 trillion sentient beings across the galaxy, and not one of them lived to see their victory. Zara's voice was barely a whisper. That's why they're quarantined? Because they saved everyone? Professor Thane's large eyes reflected a deep, ancient sadness. The Union Council met in emergency session immediately after Operation Final Dawn. The debate lasted for weeks. Some members wanted to honor humanity with the highest galactic decorations. Others wanted to invite them to join the Union as honored allies. But they didn't, said Keth, his light dim with understanding. No, the professor confirmed. They didn't, because the council realized something terrifying about human nature. He walked to the front of the classroom and faced his students directly. Humans, he said, don't just fight to win. They fight to end the fight permanently. When faced with an existential threat, they don't look for compromise or containment. They look for complete victory, regardless of the cost to themselves. The students stared at him in silence. The council asked themselves a simple question. Professor Thane continued. What happens the next time there's a conflict in the galaxy? What happens when humans decide that some other species represents a threat to galactic peace? What happens when they conclude that the only way to solve a problem is to eliminate it entirely? Understanding dawned on the students' faces. They realized, Professor Thane said softly, that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy not because they want to hurt others, but because they're willing to sacrifice everything, including themselves, to protect what they believe in. And the thing they believe in most strongly is that evil should not be allowed to exist. So they quarantined humanity, whispered Voss. They did. Not as punishment, but as protection. Protection for the rest of the galaxy, from a species so committed to absolute victory that they would rather die than allow evil to survive. Professor Thane returned to his desk and began packing away the data crystals. The official record states that the Ravager swarm was defeated through advanced Union military tactics. The truth is classified at the highest levels. Most citizens of the galaxy will never know that their existence was purchased with the voluntary sacrifice of 17,000 humans. Professor, asked Mira, what happened to the rest of humanity? The ones who didn't volunteer for the mission? They're still in their solar system, he replied. Still building, still growing, still believing that sometimes the only way to protect good is to destroy evil completely. The Union maintains a monitoring station at the edge of their system, but we don't interfere with them. Do they know why they're quarantined? Professor Thane sealed the container of classified files. No, they believe it's because we consider them too primitive, and perhaps it's better that way. The class bell rang, but no one moved. The students sat in their seats, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had learned. Finally, Zara spoke. Professor, will we ever tell them the truth? Professor Thane looked at his students with an expression of infinite sadness. Child, the truth is that humanity saved our galaxy by proving they're too dangerous to be part of it. That knowledge would destroy them. Sometimes, the greatest kindness is allowing heroes to believe they're villains. As the students filed out of the classroom in silence, Professor Thane remained behind, staring at the sealed container that held the secret history of galactic civilization. Outside the windows, 3 suns set over Nexus Prime, casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward the distant star system where humanity waited in isolation, forever banned from the society they had died to save.